And how you doing, everybody? It's time again for Bible study. I am Pastor Mike Carey of the First United Methodist Church in Nevada, and this is our ongoing twice weekly Bible study. I've been off for a little bit here, had a little vacation time, and now we're going to get back into the routine of things between now and summer sometime. We're going to keep doing this, and the study that I'd like to do, this is a little bit more of a short-term study. It is an Adam Hamilton study. It's entitled When Christians Get It Wrong. And it's more of a topical study at this point in time that, it'll be self-explanatory. And you can always comment on it if as you're watching this Facebook. There's a comment section there. You can always comment to me, which I see in real time as you send it along. And I can always try to verbally respond to you. If not, I can try and later on comment to you in written form back to you directly. But let's just get going here. When Christians Get It Wrong, an Adam Hamilton study. Research shows that non-Christian young adults, now, and let me make that very clear, non-Christian young adults have rejected the Christian faith, and we see that more and more young people, young adults are not interested in being a part of the church. You see the census forms where it says religion, and you see other or none on young adults. They are rejecting the Christian faith for five basic reasons, research shows. Number one, they reject the Christian faith because they believe unchristian ways, they see the unchristian ways in the way that a lot of professing Christians act. They think that Christians, professing Christians, are acting in unchristian ways. Secondly, they are turned off by the anti-intellectual, anti-science stance of some Christians. Now, not all Christians. Now, these are not blanket statements. Some Christians. Thirdly, they're turned off because of some Christians' view of other world religions. Fourth, they're turned off because they have questions about the explanation people make regarding God's role and place in human suffering. And then they're also rejecting the Christian faith because of the view that some Christians have regarding homosexuality. Now, the research that we're going to be talking about was done in the year 2007, and you might think, wow, that's kind of ancient history already. We've only seen the results of this research increase over the last 15 years or so. In 2007, there was a book written called Unchristian. It was written by David Kinnaman and Gabe Lyons. Kinnaman and Lyons, Unchristian. And what they did, they used the research of the Barna Group, Barna, the Barna Group, which is a highly respected, very reputable research group. And they did research on many hundreds of young adults, which would be the age grouping between 18 and 35. Now, the research in that group, what they did not do was explore theological issues that turned young adults away from the Christian faith. This is not theological at all. What they were focusing on was understanding the perceptions of non-Christian young adults have on Christianity. Big difference, because the way you perceive things may not always be accurate or true, but most people make their judgments based on their perceptions or what they see and how they see things. The five major takeaways of this particular research by the Barna Group was 91% of those interviewed felt Christians were anti-homosexual. And part of the study will be going, we'll explore each one of these groups in detail. Secondly, 87% believe that Christians are judgmental. 85% said Christians are hypocritical. Now remember, these are perceptions that non-Christian young adults ages 18 to 35 have of Christians. 75% of those research said Christians are too political. And 70% said that Christians are basically insensitive. Wow. Let me just run over that again real quick. 91% said Christians are anti-homosexual. 87% said Christians are judgmental. 85% Christians are hypocritical. 75% Christians are too political. 70% Christians are insensitive. Wow. Now, there's another side to this coin. The very people that were being described by these non-Christian young adults are basically the people that are presently leaving, or in the process of leaving, trying to leave, the United Methodist Church, as we have our debate over the role and place of homosexuality and conservatives versus progressives versus liberals. And these people are leaving the United Methodist Church either to form their own version of Methodism, or they're leaving for churches of other denominations, conservative churches, and they're going to churches that reinforce what they already believe. Now you might think, well, okay, that's not really unusual. There shouldn't be any red flags going up about that. Well, yes, there should, because what we're seeing today, what I believe we're seeing, is that people do not want to have their faith challenged. Now, some people right away, that's a red flag. You know, why in the world would I want my faith challenged? I think an unchallenged faith, an unexamined faith, is basically no faith at all. It's a faith that won't stand in the day of battle. People today simply do not want to think, period. Not just about their faith. People do not want to think. I believe what I believe, and that's it. You know, don't bother me with the facts or the truth. People today have become, I believe, intellectually lazy. And that's not just true in societal things. It's also true in matters of faith, and just in general. People, more and more today, are wanting to be told what to do and what to think. They don't want to think it out for themselves. They just want, somebody else. Now, some of the best preaching advice I ever got, I received early in my ministry from a older gentleman who was a retired executive from a large insurance company. Rest in peace, Doug. Doug Clausen was his name. He was a real sharp guy, had 2 master's degrees, had risen basically to the top of his profession. Very unassuming in one way, but very quirky kind of guy in another. And I had preached a sermon in the church where I was serving as minister of youth and education. I was, every once in a while, was given an opportunity to take a turn in the pulpit. And he came up to me after this particular sermon, and he said, you are going to do well as a preacher. You tell people what to think. And that's what people want today. Now, we had a real interesting discussion after he made that statement. Doug was always saying, he deliberately would say outrageous things just to get people thinking and talking. That was one of his great gifts. He was, in many ways, one of the best mentors I ever had, because he showed me the value of thinking and trying to look at things as objectively as possible from every possible direction. And we had a real interesting discussion about that statement, because I strongly disagreed with him. I did not think that I was telling people what to think. I thought of myself to be quite the opposite. But in the course of that discussion, I came to understand what it was that he was saying and what he was trying to get me to see. Now, if that was true back in the late 70s, in terms of people wanting to be told what to think about being intellectually and spiritually lazy, how much more so then is that the case today? How much more true is it today? The reason I keep coming back to this, and you might think I'm belaboring this point, is because this is serious, and I think potentially, not potentially, it is dangerous. We are seeing this in our society and in our world. This was part of the dynamic of pre-Nazi Germany. People were told what to think. Economic conditions in Germany were very, very bad post World War I, and they were looking for solutions, and they were being told, do this, do this, do this, and think this, think this, think this. And what this ended up doing was fanning the flames of anti Semitism and hatred, which led to the Holocaust, which most of us believe was one of the most horrible things to ever happen in the history of the world. And you're seeing an increase today, especially here in America, regarding hate crimes. And the reason for that is it's easier to hate another person or another group of people and blame them for your problems than to take responsibility yourself or to look at the broader issue that may be going on. Hatred is not intellectually honest. It has tunnel vision. It's lazy. It's easy to hate. Anybody can hate. Jesus talks about love and grace. That's hard. Hatred's easy. Anybody can be a hater. And Lord knows there's plenty of them out there today. When the people that were or a part of this research, hundreds of young adults were asked what they thought Jesus stood for, the vast majority of them used the same word, one word, and that word was love. And that's correct. That's very, very much right. It is probably the one most defining word in terms of Jesus's ministry. It was the key element in Jesus' ministry. When the rich young ruler came up to him and asked, "What must I do to inherit the kingdom of God?" Jesus said, and what was the greatest commandment? And Jesus said, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength." And the second one is very much akin to it. Love your neighbor as yourself. There you go. Love God, love your neighbor. There is the defining elements of the Christian faith. And yet, there are so many Christians today now, purportedly professing Christians, who are insensitive, critical, judgmental, mean-spirited people. And I've known them, you've known them, we've all seen them, and you might be dealing with the whole thing yourself as well. Claiming to be Christians and yet showing some of the most unchristian tendencies, characteristics, lifestyle. I remember I've had this happen more than once. Adam Hamilton cites the example too, and I think probably most Christian ministers who try to example and live out grace and preach grace. I was doing a funeral one time for a young man, was an older teen, and graveside service, and this young man had committed suicide. And there are a lot of people that have a very specific view on what happens to someone who commits suicide. For a lot of people, they consider it to be the unpardonable sin, in that once you've killed yourself, you can't, because it's a sin, you can't ask forgiveness for what you've done. Therefore, you have unforgiven sin in your life, and God judges that. That's theological hogwash. I don't believe that for a second. And at this particular service, I was trying to proclaim grace and mercy and assure the family, the parents, that their loved ones was in the hands of a loving God. And one person came up to me afterwards and said, "Why didn't you speak the truth to this family? Why didn't you tell them that their son is in hell?" And like Adam Hamilton and most other ministers along with me, my response was, "How can you be so sure? How can you know what was in that young person's heart and mind? What were they thinking when all of this happened and what went down? And how can you be so sure that you know the mind of God? And how can you be so insensitive as to want to tell people something like that and compound their pain? Why would you want to do that?" Some people, it's more important, they're willing to die, and if it means that's what they have to be right. They want to be right at any cost, and they don't care how much pain they may inflict upon others in the process. And like I said before, that's just bull cookies. That's just terrible. Jesus, in his dealing with the Pharisees, you remember the Pharisees, Jesus in his ministry, and we've always got to look back at Jesus as our model. Jesus is the colander through which everything else must flow. And things that get caught up in that colander, then you better take a serious look at them. But Jesus never got angry at prostitutes, adulterers, or ordinary sinners. And I use that quote unquote air quotes here, ordinary sinners. In fact, those were the people that flocked to Jesus by the thousands back in his ministry. And one of the reasons why, well, two of the reasons why, is number one, he preached love and grace. And secondly, he was non-judgmental. Jesus was non-judgmental. He constantly told people, "Go and sin no more." Who condemns you? Nobody. Well, then neither do I. Go and sin no more. That's non-judgmentalism. The only people that Jesus really had harsh words for were the religious people, the Pharisees. And what angered him most about them was their judgmentalism, their hypocrisy, and their failure to love other people. They judged other people. They didn't love them. And these were the religious leaders of the day. They were called Pharisees. They believed primarily believed that God was interested in people following rules. They were rule makers. They were rule keepers. And they thought God was a God of rules. God has his list, and you better be following it here. Jesus taught that God's primary rule was to love God. And God's interest wasn't in condemning sinners, but was drawing them to himself. Totally different from what the Pharisees were talking about. And they opposed Jesus. They were Jesus's primary critics and the ones that ultimately took him to the cross. Now, the word Pharisee literally means someone who is set apart or who is separated. The Pharisees believed that holiness and a life pleasing to God came from separating themselves from sin and obeying the commandments, obeying the law. The law was the big thing, and that's what got Jesus in trouble with them, is that they accused him of being a lawbreaker. He wasn't a lawbreaker. He came to reinterpret and expand the understanding and the applications of the law. And they failed to see that God's primary concern was not rules, but people. We need to remember that God is primarily concerned about people, not rules. And the Pharisees, they were repulsed by Jesus' willingness to associate with those people. You ever heard yourself use that expression? Those people out there. Yeah. When you start using that kind of terminology, when you talk about those people, you better stop and check, because Jesus called those folks hypocrites or pretenders, people who were pretending to be something and someone that they were not. Now, disclaimer, we are all in danger of that, and I'm guilty as charged, Your Honor, here. That's why Jesus took a lot of time to warn his own apostles against 4 different kinds of hypocrisy. And we find that in Matthew chapter 16, verses 1 through 8, and then verses 16 through 18. If you want to check that out, go ahead and read it. But 4 different kinds of hypocrisy. First one is wrong motives, doing the right thing for the wrong reason. Oh, ever found yourself in that position? See, the Pharisees would pray and fast. Now, normally that'd be a great thing, but they did it to draw attention to themselves and to make everybody think that they were so pious and so spiritual, and they did it basically to get ahead within their own Pharisaical party, which was also a political party, and to make people think that they were so much better than everybody else. Now, not everyone does prayer and fasting for the same reasons, or for those reasons, for the reasons of drawing attention to themselves. But if you do it to try and get closer to God, spend more time with God, you do well. That's exactly what it's supposed to happen. But if you do it to gain the praise of people, or to make people think that, boy, they are so religious, what you're guilty of is trying to use God to further your own stature in the community, amongst your circle of friends, or whatever the case may be. You're doing the right thing for the wrong reason. The second form of hypocrisy that Jesus warned his disciples about is pointing out the sins of others without seeing their own sin. This shows up especially in Matthew chapter 7, the first 5 verses. And it's this tremendous metaphor. Remember, Jesus was a carpenter. And so as a carpenter, he knows something about wood. And so it's natural that he would draw on this kind of a metaphor. He says, how can you criticize another person about the speck of sawdust that they have in their own eye when you have a 2x4 sticking in your own eye? So remove the 2x4 from your own eye before you start judging other people for the speck that they have in their own eye. Now, when he said that, when he used that metaphor, he was referring to the religious people, the Pharisees of his own day, because he was saying, you're being critical of other people, but you don't see the sins that are in your own life. And you need to take care of what's going on in your own life before you start making comments and making judgments about other people. Jesus is saying, stop pointing out the sins of others. You have enough issues of your own that you need to deal with. Take care of business at home before you start trying to take care of the business of somebody else. The third form of hypocrisy Jesus points out to his disciples is the idea of majoring in minors, or majoring on minors. The Jews, for example, were taught from the get-go, encouraged to tithe, to the point where they were encouraged to give a tenth of all they had. And they would carry it out to the nano degree, even to the point of taking a tenth of their herbs and giving them to the temple and to various concerns, other religious causes. Jesus talked about this in Matthew chapter 23, verses 23 and 24. He refers to these people as blind guides. You never want to have a blind guide. You want a guide that can see, knows where they're going, and can get you to where they're going. And Christians are definitely guilty of this. We are arguing over forms of government, and by that I mean not just civil government, but church government as well. forms of baptism, theological issues, interpretation of minor points of Scripture, what kind of music is right to be played in church, should be played in church. Christians have been arguing about this kind of stuff ever since the church came into being. Wars have been fought between Christians on this kinds of stuff. Hundreds of thousands of lives have been lost in fighting over these kinds of issues, over sectarian differences. While Jesus taught that the characteristic of a Christian's life is meant to be love, non-judgmentalism, not majoring on minors. Fourth point, kind of hypocrisy that Jesus warned his disciples to be weary of, is being two-faced. People who appear to be one thing when you first meet them, but once you get to know them, you find out that, boy, they are something totally different than what you thought. One church I served early in my ministry, they had a young family join, husband, wife, 2 young children. And at first, they just looked like the model family. He was a big, good-looking guy, very approachable, very verbal, communicative. She was just a sweetest little thing, and 2 adorable kids. And he was a talker. His profession was a financial manager and financial manager planner. And he seemed to be a stand-up kind of guy. And he talked some of our more well-to-do church members into making some investments that he really thought were going to pan out and turn big. And you know what? Within a year, it turned out he was a scammer. Not only were the local cops looking for him, the feds were looking for him. His wife knew nothing about it, and he ended up in the federal penitentiary. And several of our church members ended up losing significant amounts of money. He went to prison. His wife divorced him because she didn't know who and what he really was, because he had been two-faced to her as well. So Jesus compared these kinds of people to a dirty cup, a cup that gets washed on the outside but not on the inside. He uses that analogy in Luke chapter 11, verse 39. He's talking about superficial religion, a faith that is basically only skin deep, and a faith that does not address the real issues of an individual, the issues of the heart and the soul. Now, not all the Pharisees were hypocrites. Some were downright curious. They would have Jesus to dinner. You see that in the Gospel of Luke. In fact, there have been books written about Jesus' relationship with the Pharisees, and it wasn't all bad. They were curious. They wanted to know. They had a spiritual hunger as well. But a lot of them, a significant number of them, missed the point. So how does this apply to us? Well, we understand how to do religious things, religious acts of devotion, but if our religion doesn't change our values, our hearts, our daily lives, the way we interact with others, our religion is simply window dressing. It's worthless. Jesus said in Luke chapter 12, verse 1, "Beware the leaven of the Pharisees." That is, beware of their hypocrisy. And he warned them because he knew that his followers would face that temptation. Well, today's Pharisees are religious people who struggle with the wrong motives. They struggle with being critical, being judgmental, missing the point, being two-faced. And that would include, to a degree, all of us. I think all of us have to deal with that in varying degrees, including myself, very much so. I am a recovering Pharisee. It's like a support group. Hi, my name is Mike, and I'm a recovering Pharisee. I am a Pharisee, and I often fall off the wagon. In fact, I think non-religious people struggle with this as well. I think everybody struggles with this. The problem is, see, non religious, non Christian people do not expect Christians to be perfect. What they want from us, though, is for us to realize and confess that we often fail to live up to our own expectations and our own convictions. In other words, quit pretending to be perfect. Stop being hypocrites. So that's where we get it wrong. And I'm going to hold up there now because we've gone on for a little while here. And next time, which will be on Wednesday, we've talked about how Christians get it wrong on this first point. We'll talk about how Christians get it right, or what do you have to do to get it right. So that's good for the moment. So thanks for stopping by on this cold, dreary Monday afternoon, April 19th. I'm Pastor Mike Carey, and I hope the Lord blesses you real good.